Okay, so boa noite. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the series Brazil 200 Years of Independence, History, Language, and Culture. It is a series of workshops offered by the Embassy of Brazil in Bridgetown and the Barbados Language Centre, Barbados Community College. My name is Schaumloeffel. I'm lecturer at the Language Centre of the Barbados Community College. Tonight, I will speak about football. And the title, I will explain that soon, is Football Madness, Football in Brazil. I will soon explain why I call this presentation Football Madness, okay? First of all, I would like to introduce this session by showing you a very short movie from the BBC about football in Brazil. It's very old, the resolution is not very good, but the content is interesting, so I would like to start today's presentation on Brazilian football, showing you this little video.
As an escape from daily problems, the attraction of the world's largest football stadium, Maracanã, is irresistible. Today is a championship match between the two best-known teams in Rio, Flamengo and Fluminense. The supporters are passionate and noisy, but nearly always good-humoured. Violence and vandalism are definitely not a part of the Brazilian soccer scene. This game attracted over 153,000 people. The stadium is said to hold 200,000. A carnival atmosphere is created by the rival groups of supporters. The festivities reach their climax when the teams come on the field.
Finalmente aparece no Maracanã o time do Flamengo. A galera rubro-negra faz a festa. De atraso, finalmente pintou em campo o clube de regatas do Flamengo. O problema maior, o Mário Jorge já havia explicado, o Flamengo se demorou muito no trânsito, se atrasou.
Top football commentators are nationally known figures and are treated as stars by the radio and television companies.
Aí começa o jogo no Maracanã. Começa o grande clássico, a grande decisão no futebol carioca em 1984. É o Fla-Flu.
Football matches in Brazil are family affairs. They attract both sexes and all social classes. Ingo Ostrovsky is a senior producer with Globo Television in Rio.
I think football in the stadium, when you come here, is very democratic. You meet people from all social levels. You meet people that come from almost everywhere in the country, everywhere in the city, from the rich areas, from the poor areas. It's very democratic. Besides, it's as a spectacle, as an art, it's beautiful to watch. You see great footballers in this stadium, in this country, right? I believe also that in the past 20 or so years, 21 years, right? This place was the only place where we could shout against the referee, against anything. This was the only place where we could come and shout freely, right? We would not be arrested for shouting here. And I think this made the sport very popular in the past years. That's more or less what I think. I like it. I like it a lot. I come whenever I can, almost every Sunday. I follow Flamengo, which is great. I like it a lot.
This was not to be Inco's day. The rival team, Fluminense, eventually produced the only goal of the match.
Prisco carrega o Fluminense à frente. Abertura para René. Assis se mete na área. Aldo parte pela direita. A bola é boa. Vem cruzamento. Olha o toque. Gol! Assis número 10. Assis número 10 para o Fluminense. Rompendo a casa dos 30 minutos do segundo tempo.
Futebol é vida, é alegria, né? Eu gosto que me traz alegria, me traz prazer, me traz satisfação.
O futebol é importante porque ele extrai o povo, ao menos é uma extração que o povo tem.
Eu gosto do futebol porque as nossas raízes, a raiz brasileira veio do futebol, apesar que o futebol nasceu na Inglaterra, mas o Brasil comanda o futebol.
Nearby, in a smart restaurant, two middle-class Fluminense supporters were also celebrating.
O futebol é paixão, e a paixão é uma característica de um povo. Não dá muito para explicar, que a paixão é um negócio que vem de dentro, vem do coração, não vem da cabeça. Então, um povo que não é civilizado, que não é nós, um povo subdesenvolvido, acha no futebol a solução para todos os seus problemas. Quando eu estou no futebol, eu esqueço de tudo. Eu esqueço da minha mulher, da minha filha, do trabalho. Eu esqueço de qualquer coisa. Eu só vejo jogadores, eu só vejo a bola, eu só vejo Fluminense na minha frente. É um negócio que não dá para explicar. Você deixa qualquer coisa. Você deixa a coisa mais importante que você jogar na vida, simplesmente para se fixar numa bola.
For Brazilians, football is more than a sport. It's an expression of a popular art.
Pelé. Up comes Schaumloeffel on the right. And it's four!
Brazil is the only country to have qualified for every World Cup, and also the only country to have won it 3 times.
And finally, the President of Mexico congratulates the captain of Brazil, and Brazil received the 1970 World Cup.
Brazil is a society in which there is a high concentration of income, a high concentration of culture, and things like that. And football, it's a media through which
Okay, so any initial comments regarding this video? As you noticed probably, the video is old because it says Brazil won the World Cup 3 times. Meanwhile, we won the World Cup 5 times already. And also the guy referred, so the video is from 1984, okay? And one of the first spectators to give his opinion, he speaks about we had to be silent in the last 21 years. So I will come back to that reference soon. Anyone would like to ask something or comment on this short video before I start the presentation? I will refer to it later as well. No? Okay. So then let's go to my presentation. The title of my presentation is Football Madness, Football in Brazil. This is the new Maracanã Stadium. So the pictures you saw there from 1984, it was the old Maracanã Stadium, and this is now the new Maracanã Stadium with less capacity. Originally, Maracanã Stadium had the capacity of 200,000 people, so almost the entire Barbados would fit in one stadium. But this is the renewed Maracanã that was built for the latest World Cup that Brazil hosted. So, first of all, Americans and some parts of the world, they refer to the sport as soccer. I refuse to use that word since it was a creation by the Americans because they have football, American football. And the ironic thing is that the Americans, they play football with their hands. So I don't know why they call it football, but I will just use the term football here and not soccer, but I'm talking about the same thing. So why do I call my presentation Football Madness? Because Janet Lever in 1983, she wrote a book and she called it Soccer Madness when she was analyzing the importance of mass sports in developing countries and the role football has or had and has obviously in Brazilian social life. So that's why I'm referring to it as madness, and also because football is madness in Brazil, and I hope to explain that a little bit to you today. It all started in 1894 when a Brazilian, he was the child of an English couple, a guy called Charles Miller. He went to a school in England, to Southampton, and when he came back to Brazil, he brought along with him 2 balls and a rule book, and the rest is history. So that's how football started in Brazil. The first official football club in Brazil was founded in 1900, and it's called Sport Club Rio Grande. That still exists up to today. Okay. What is interesting is that at the beginning, football was kind of a noble sport, so it was only played by the elites. But soon, Brazilians started to improvise the game, since it was pretty easy to produce a ball, even if you didn't have an official ball, just some rug, some old paper, and some space, some vacant lot, some beach area or whatever area would be appropriate to start playing football. Obviously not according to the rule book, but still is a form of amateur football. We even have a name for that, so we call this pelada. And pelada is an informal game where some people just come together and say, hey, okay, we are 12 people, let's say. Okay, 6 one side, 6 the other side. And there we have 2 teams. So now let's put some rocks or some tins, some cans that will form the goal. And then you start playing a pelada. It's very common to see on the beaches, for example, in Brazil, people playing their peladas, or in vacant lots in cities, so everywhere. And that's also why football spread so easily in Brazil, because it didn't demand much equipment or expensive equipment, and everyone could play, right? So I claim, actually, I say this usually, that it is one of the most democratic institutions in the world, football, because everyone can play, and everyone has to play according to the rules. And at this moment, it doesn't matter when you're playing football if you're rich, if you're poor, if you're white, if you're black, or whatever. What matters is your performance. So that is why football is a very democratic sport, I would say. And obviously, as you can imagine, the Pelada grounds were the grounds where a lot of the big football stars in Brazil, it was their birthplace, right? But football, it was not always simple and democratic. It was also used, especially in 1970. The pictures you saw of Brazil raising the trophy, that was 1970 in Mexico. It was a so-called Jules Rimet trophy that Brazil won for winning the World Cup 3 times. And in 1970, Brazil was under a dictatorship. So a military coup took over in 1964 in Brazil. It lasted until 1985. And obviously the dictatorship in that period used football also as a political tool, okay? We saw one of the guys in the stadium saying, this was the only place, or this is the only place where we could shout, where we could criticize, where we could shout at the referee, showing that we were disgusted, that we don't like something. We couldn't do that on the roads for 21 years. And he was exactly referring to that period when football was used as an ideology of national integration. Even the government at the time had a motto called Brasil, Ame-o, or Deixe-o. So Brazil, love it or leave it, meaning you either are with us, the dictatorship, or you better go away to another country. And actually, a lot of people were in exile during that time for speaking out against the government, okay, especially famous artists and stuff. Brazil won the World Cup 3 times, okay, up to 1970. And then in 1970, a crisis came on. Okay, so after that, Brazil, there was a long time until 1994 that Brazil didn't win anything in terms of football, of course. And there was a big crisis in the sport, and also there was a big crisis end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, in the economy, in the government, so far so that democracy was reinstated in 1985, and we had a lot of economic trouble, and the same way the national football team that we call the Seleção was in trouble as well for different reasons. In the World Cups of 1982 and 1986, football experienced big improvements by the Europeans, pretty much in terms of the tactics and the way they were tackling and the way they were playing football. And Brazil had, in 1986, I remember this since I was a child then, had an extremely talented generation. But people were criticizing that kind of football because it was just like a form of art. It was to play beautifully, but they never achieved anything. Okay, so we even have this motto that the Seleção, the national team of 1986, was the best ever to not win anything. Okay, I remember as a child I cried when Brazil lost in 1986. If I'm not wrong, it was in the quarterfinals in Spain, if I'm not wrong, right? But then in 1994, Brazil wins the World Cup in the US for a 4th time. But it was a terrible final. I remember that. It was an ugly game. But Brazilians learned by then. It was a 0-0 against Italy, and they won in the penalty shootouts. And I remember that Brazilians learned how to play in an efficient manner, kind of imitating the tough way Europeans would play, and creativity was left aside, okay? So Brazil suffered, but they were efficient and won by the end of the day, right? Now, the following World Cup, Brazil was doing well, already had Ronaldinho and had Ronaldo in 98 in France. They lost against France 3-0, and that was the first time France won the World Cup, and it was terrible for Brazilians. I should rather say, I did not, there is some slide that I lost here, referring to the period from the beginning when Brazil won the World Cup, and Sweden for the first time in 58, and Chile in 62. And then before that, Brazil hosted the World Cup in 1950. And when Brazil hosted the World Cup in 1950, in the same Maracanã Stadium, Brazil had everything to win their first World Cup. Just a second, somebody is trying to join here. Let's do that. So, it was a big national drama. So it was not a final, so to say. It was 3 teams in the final. So they had to play 2 games. Brazil won the first game, and all what Brazil needed in 1950 at home, playing against Uruguay, was a draw, and Brazil would be the world champion for the first time. And this also now, this what I will tell you now, shows the drama about what football means for Brazilians. They did not win the World Cup at home, okay, in 1950, because Uruguay defeated Brazil, and that caused a big commotion in Brazil, with even people committing suicide. Can you imagine that? Because of football committing suicide? It shows the importance of football for Brazilians. And it also gave way to some racial manifestations in Brazil because they had to find a scapegoat. And some people decided that the goalkeeper of Brazil, it was the goalkeeper's fault that Brazil lost. And the goalkeeper was an Afro-Brazilian, so they started to blame him that Brazil lost, and that gave way to ugly racial discrimination and comments at the time. Okay, so Brazil was always like involved with big passion in football. Now, the next World Cup after France, 1998, was 2002, that was hosted by Japan and South Korea. And we saw that Brazil played a terrible football in 94, but then creativity was better in 98, but they lost terribly against France in the final. But then 2002, we had the confirmation that Brazil made it possible to make a combination of creativity and technique, training and power, okay? And that allowed Brazil to win the World Cup in Japan at the time, okay? One of the factors was that by then, since the European leagues have a lot of money, they would hire Brazilian players. Sometimes Brazilian players go to play in Europe before they become professionals in Brazil. Some go at the age of 15, 16, and so. And sometimes you hear about Brazilian players playing in some team in Italy, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in the UK, or especially also in Portugal because of the cultural similarities. And we never heard of that player in Brazil. So the guy is completely unknown in Brazil, okay? Because of that. So, and at that time, what already happened is that a lot of what we call our craques are the guys that play football well, they were playing in Europe. So they did not only have the Brazilian creativity, but they also learned the European technique. And that combination made it possible for Brazil to win the World Cup, okay? After that, we had some corruption scandals, management problems, political influences. There was a scandal in 2005 of match fixing that involved referees. And what happened, and that is funny, is that from that time onwards, Brazil, that always had football as its very popular sport available to everybody, started to become a little more a sport for the elites. And I will tell you why. It started to become a little more the sport of the elites because the teams started to charge a lot as entrance fees for a game. Whereas before it was very cheap, it was like the main entertainment for all Brazilians to go on a Sunday. It was cheap to go and watch your own team playing. It now is expensive to acquire a ticket and watch a game. And also from the players' side, a lot of people go to so-called football schools. And if you want to go to a football school, you need to have money, especially at the beginning of your career. One of the players that, for example, was middle high class and is well known was a player called Kaká. Kaká is today retired, but he was a perfect example of that, from middle high class that became a so-called craque in our national team and also playing in Europe. But still, football is one of the quickest ways for people from that don't have such a very good social condition to climb the ladder, okay? Because people that are, for example, they come from shanty towns, and so their perspective of having a good profession later, of attending university, are very low. And playing football, becoming a star, if the person has a talent, it's one of the quickest way to climb the social ladder still in Brazil, okay? After that, Brazil suffered a little bit, so we had the World Cup in Germany, didn't have much hopes for the subsequent World Cups. 2006, Brazil lost again against France in the quarterfinals. In 2010, in the South Africa World Cup, again in the quarterfinals against the Netherlands. And in 2014, a very interesting moment happens in Brazil in terms of economy, of politics, and sports, because Brazil will host, or did host better, the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympics in 16. And that demanded a huge investment, including what you see here in the background, the Maracanã Stadium, and stadiums all over Brazil in different cities in all the regions of Brazil had to be renewed, because most of those stadiums were from the last World Cup from 1950. And that demanded from the government a lot of injection of money in terms of financing the construction of those stadiums, and also in financing infrastructure to host the World Cup. And what happened is then that Brazilians said, this is enough. There were some corruption scandals going on in politics as well. And people went to the streets to protest. And they were even against hosting the World Cup, although Brazil is the big football nation, because he said, we can use this money better in hospitals and infrastructure and public transportation and so on. In terms of sports, Brazil was not doing well, and nobody had hopes Brazil would win the World Cup at home, because the team was a young, unexperienced team. But we did not expect that in the semifinals, Brazil would lose terribly, 7-1 to Germany. And that was also a second terrible moment for the Brazilians in general, their spirit and their psychological situation. Such a defeat, 7-1, Brazil never lost 7-1, and especially in a semi-final playing in Brazil. It is even said that the Germans kind of pitied Brazil in the second half, and 7-1 was only because the Germans didn't put pressure enough to perhaps win 10-1, 12-1, or whatever. So it was a big disaster again for Brazilians, that World Cup. After that, we had a reformulation, okay, in the team. And we played again in Russia, not having much hope. And again, Brazil was defeated by Belgium in the quarterfinals in 2019. And now the next World Cup is coming up. And some people have high hopes that Brazil may have a chance this time to win the World Cup. But let me say something. What is really interesting when we talk about football in Brazil, we even have this joke that even thieves give us a break in Brazil when Brazil plays in the World Cup. And it's not simply a joke. There is some truth in it, because when Brazil plays in the World Cup, it is obviously live on open TV, and everyone watches it. It looks like a big holiday. If you have to cross a big city and have some business on the other side of the city, the best time to do that is while Brazil is playing, because there is no traffic, nobody's on the road, everyone is glued to their TV sets to watch Brazil playing. And you hear when Brazil scores this big commotion, the city shouts out, and everyone commemorating. It is a very big event, especially the World Cup, when Brazil is playing. Okay, so we had in our history, we had two big guys, well-known guys, two players called Pelé. Pelé, we simply call him the king of football, and he was objective, he was perfect, and we say Pelé was the best player of all times. The Argentines don't agree, they say it was Maradona, and as usual, they are modest, and they say if Pelé was king, then Maradona is God. So we can just laugh at that, but our big enemies in football, the Argentines, also have to have their big player, and no doubt Maradona was a big player as well. And we had this curious guy called Garrincha, and Garrincha embodied what we Brazilians call the malandro. And the malandro is, it's very difficult to explain this in another language, what the malandro really means. The malandro is a guy that applies his tricks. He knows what he's doing, and he's always like at the edge between what is legal and illegal, and he's trying to find shortcuts. And he's witty, and so the malandro can apply to real life when someone is, trying to find a shortcut and an easy way to do things, but also when somebody is very good in playing football, for example. And Garrincha was a guy who was adored by the Brazilians. He was the so-called Joe the Plumber or the João, and he was acting on behalf of the have-nots in Brazil. We called him Garrincha o Anjo das Pernas Tortas, so something like the angel of the crooked legs, because he had some crooked legs. And I would like to show you a very short video now that gives you an idea on how Garrincha plays, so what his style of playing is like. So let me play this, not the full video, but just a little bit for you to have an idea about Garrincha.
Excuse me, Marco, is there audio with the video?
Sorry?
If there's audio with the video, then we're not hearing the audio coming through the stream. You can see it, but we can't hear it.
Okay, no, there is no audio, it's just some background sound. I would have to reset up everything. I will not do that right now, okay?
Oh, okay, no problem.
So just watch the images. It will tell you a lot. Okay, I think it gives you a pretty good idea on the talent of Garrincha. And as you see, he is creativity pure. Tactics was not his big thing. Okay. Another thing I would like to show you, which is interesting, is the story of the Pelé Sartre corner in a city called Araraquara in São Paulo. It also illustrates what football means for Brazilians. You see the citation there is from a book called The Brazilians by Joseph Page, 1996. And what happened is that the famous, okay, somebody else joining, let me see. Okay, nobody there, okay. The famous Jean-Paul Sartre, French philosopher, casually met on a corner with Pelé in Araraquara. Pelé was on his way, surrounded by children, going to the stadium where he would play, and Jean-Paul Sartre was in Araraquara for a conference, and a lot of intellectuals were together with Sartre that was already famous in his days, right? And what happened is when they met Pelé, all the intellectuals that were with Sartre started to follow Pelé, and Sartre suddenly find himself alone until the intellectuals realized what they were doing, and they went back to see Sartre again. And from that day onwards, the corner where Pelé and Sartre met in Araraquara is known as the Pelé-Sartre corner. Okay, so that also shows that even intellectuals care about football in Brazil. It's not just something for the masses. Okay, the same from the same book, also Joseph Page. I would like to show you a bit about the meaning of football for Brazilians here with this passage here. So he uses, obviously, he's American. He uses soccer instead of football. But he says the following: the often used expression soccer country defines Brazil as accurately as the descriptive carnival country. Indeed, the game has managed to captivate Brazilians in every corner of the land, from Amazonia to the deep south, with an equal measure of devotion. In fact, it has sustained a degree of popularity that even carnival has never been able to match. The sport has played a major role in unifying both nation and community. Everyone follows the national team and takes great pride in its successes. Newcomers, whether from abroad or from another part of the country, are able to integrate themselves into the social life of a city or town by becoming fans of a local team or by participating in the game themselves. And that is so true. I can attest that. So although Brazil is also known as the carnival country, we will actually, in one of the sessions, we will talk about carnival in this series, by the way. Although Brazil is known as the carnival country, football is all over the place. Carnival, not necessarily, okay? I come from the south of Brazil that was colonized by Germans, Italians, Japanese, and so. And in the area where I come from, or better, in Brazil, usually when there is carnival, right? Everything stops from the carnival weekend to Ash Wednesday. In the place where I come from, in the south of Brazil, Carnival Monday or Tuesday, Mardi Gras or so, is not commemorated. So people simply go to work in those days. It's not a holiday. So nothing happens where I come from during Carnival time, or barely anything happens, perhaps on the weekend only. But Carnival is not very big. But football, no matter where you are, football is big in Brazil, okay, very big. And you follow the national team. Everyone does. So as you see, football is not just a game. It is really the embodiment of Brazilianness. So the sport is, in certain terms, elevated to a form of art, like any other form of art that different peoples around the world have. And football is also a mechanism of individual and collective self-expression. As you saw Joseph Page mentioning there, if you want to integrate into a place, a new city where you move to, the best way of doing that is via football, for example. Being a fan of that team, or even you play with your new colleagues or whatever neighbors. And also, football is a reliance on individuality and improvisation. It is kind of a faith in magic, okay? Because the magic of football, the unforeseen final score, and you rooting for the team, it is a source of joy for the players and for the spectators. And some people say that football merges sports with samba. Samba, as you know, is one of our biggest styles of music that has a whole African influence. So samba is truly Afro-Brazilian because it combines the drumming and the rhythm of the Africans and and the lyrics and so of European tradition. And also in the stadium, you see the fans, they have organized groups that support the team. And they usually come into the stadium with drums and they beat those drums, trying to imply to give a certain rhythm to their team so the team does not lose momentum. Okay. So there is this combination of rhythm, of samba, of drumming, and football in the stadium itself. Okay. So the way the fans support their team is by using drums, by rhythm, by singing. Okay. So Brazilian spectators, they are part, so to say, of the game. They're not just there to watch it and be happy if their team scores. They're there to also kind of give the rhythm to the team. Okay. We had a Brazilian thinker called Roberto da Mata, and Roberto da Mata referred to the football as a tool of social justice because football has fixed rules. It happens within four lines. It depends, and I mentioned it already, just on your talent. Okay, nobody will ask you if you're white, black, rich, or poor. What matters is the way you perform between the four lines of the pitch. And Damata referred to that as social justice that is possible in the field, in the football field. Okay. We already saw before when I mentioned dictatorship in the 1960s and 70s that football is used by politicians as a confidence booster of the nation. And even after the country reinstated the democracy, whenever Brazil wins something, and not just football, also when Brazil wins something in volleyball or something, first thing that happened when those players travel back to Brazil from wherever in the world they won a certain cup, they usually go and see the president. And obviously that is then used by the politicians and the president as a tool to boost the confidence of the nation, but also in their own advantage, having in mind the next election, right? I also said that football is a way of climbing the social ladder. It's obvious. And football gives to Brazilians a sense of belonging. It gives Brazilians an ID, okay? And even in their teams. My team is called Grêmio Porto Alegre from the south of Brazil. And for example, the people, the supporters of Grêmio Porto Alegre, they are called Nação Gremista, so the Grêmio Nation, Nação Gremista, or the supporters of, for example, Flamengo in Rio, they are called Nação Rubro-Negra. So because the colors of Flamengo are black and red, so they are called the Black and Red Nation. Okay. And football, we should not forget that, is also panis et circenses. Panis et circenses is a Latin term. It means bread and circus. And why bread and circus? Because football is a way of satisfying people. And the older Romans would say, if people have bread and circus, meaning enough to eat, and they have leisure, something to get entertained, then they will be happy and they will not be ready to, for example, overthrow the government or criticize how things are going. Okay, so it is a form of also bending the pressures, the social pressures, the economic pressures, and the feelings of unhappiness or something like that. Okay. And football, I mentioned that in the first session when I presented, football is also big business. It involves billions of dollars every year. Okay. I remember in that first session, I just was referring to my team, and I told you that more or less the budget of my football team for a month is about $10 million a month, 10 million reais, sorry, which is about $2 million. But there is much more involved in that. So advertising, TV shows, live games, and so on. And this is just my team that is not the biggest team in Brazil. So you can see that it is a big industry that employs also a lot of people. So the maintenance of a stadium that hosts a game at least once a week demands a lot of people to work in it. The preparation of the players, and also football teams, they have different classes. So they have players that start like at the age of 8 and 10, and they are carried up to their adulthood in the team. So all of them, they play different leagues, like U15, U13, and so on. And all that demands money investment to find the best talents, okay? Now, just a little bit of humor as well to show the Brazilian style and the tactics compared to other countries, okay? So the British style or the English style is pretty straightforward if they want to achieve something and score a goal. So this drawing would perhaps describe the English style of playing football. This would be more or less the Italian style of playing football, also more or less straightforward. And this drawing represents the Brazilian style of playing football. Okay, so that is it. I have another 2 small videos that I want to show, and then later I will open up for some questions and discussions. I just have to make sure now. I have to make sure that the sound works. Just a second, okay? There we go. And the first short video I'd like to show you is this one here, which is also an old one from the BBC.
Football is the life and soul of Brazil.
Can you hear the audio?
Yes.
Okay, good.
An extravagant claim for a game, but one supported by history and made clear by life in the 21st century. It was football in the late 19th and early 20th centuries which brought together the different races which make up the Brazilian nation. It is a passion for football which has most given the country an identity, 5 times the winners of the World Cup. It's football which gives expression to a national characteristic, enjoying showing off. It's the dominant topic of conversation among both rich and poor. Its style has had many influences. English originally, the game brought to Brazil by Charles Miller, born to English parents in Sao Paulo, returning from his education in the motherland. From the Angolan slaves with the taunting capoeira dance, with the deceptive moves of martial art without ever making contact, thought to be the birth of the samba. From the street games of bygone days which spawned among many the most famous Brazilian of all, Pelé, a legend of Brazilian football still going strong. From all have come a combination of exuberance, flamboyance, grace and invention tinged with mischief, which has set Brazilian football apart. But natural gifts and an instinctive love of a football need development, and that is provided first by an education system in which playing with the ball, not in a team competition or against another school, but on a small court, the football de salon, is a compulsory part of the curriculum. The desire of another Englishman, a graduate of Leeds University with a first in sports science, to introduce the skills of football de salon to all children is the basis of this video. Simon Clifford has learned from Pelé and other great Brazilians, Zico, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Juninho, and is the founder of the International Confederation of Football de Salão. Here is the secret of Brazilian artistry and what Pelé called the beautiful game.
Okay, and now a second video.
In the world. O Brasil tem uma variedade de esportes, tem muito talento, mas o futebol é maior. O futebol é a nossa paixão. É o melhor do mundo. Não diga que não, é paixão nacional, é o melhor do mundo.
O Brasil é um país que o futebol ele é feito para, além de uma prática esportiva.
I maybe drink too much of it and turn into a human windmill.
Valoriza, ele resgata aquelas crianças que estão perdidas e que você sabe que tem um futuro promissório no futebol.
Porque o futebol é bom, sem o futebol nós não somos.
Okay, so I will have another 2 or 3 videos that I could show you that are interesting about football, but we don't have time for that. I will now open the floor for comments and questions. So feel free if you want to say something, comment something, or ask something.
Marco?
Yes, Carlos.
I'd like to congratulate you on having chosen a video or a movie which shows Fla-Flu, which is the biggest, the most important game in rivalry in Brazil and in Rio de Janeiro, and it shows. I think it was a game from the 70s because I saw a player called Rivellino who was sold to Fluminense in around 1977. So you can see that I am a fan. And
you mean the game I showed here? It was 1984.
84.
Yes.
I think I saw. Yeah, no, the film, yes, but I think I saw Rivellino. So anyway, but I think it was very well chosen because it shows. I think it's the perfect way of experiencing football in Brazil. Is being in Rio and going to Maracanã on a Sunday afternoon. I have done it many times, and it's very good. And I'd like to comment on a few things. I think you showed a lot of interesting aspects, not only of the game, but of all the interpretations and how it is seen and felt in Brazil. And I was a kid in 1970, so for me it was just seeing a perfect team, the perfect seleção on TV. But I think that although governments have always tried to take advantage of sports to boost their popularity, especially dictatorships, I don't think in Brazil they have been successful. You know that since 1994, presidential elections have been held in Brazil in the same year of the World Cup. World Cup is in July. Well, this year is going to be in November, but it's always in July, and the elections are in October, and there was no noticeable influence in the results. And although in 2014 we had that terrible defeat at the 7-1, basically in 2014 it was the 11th time Brazil reached the semis, so I think it was a record because we also played all the World Cups and won 5 times. So, I mean, it's impossible to forget, but it was not that bad coming to the last Final Four. And 2 years later, Brazil won the Olympics for the first time, actually, which is a different competition. But anyway, it was quite important. But my experience in football is way, way different from the experiences Brazilians are having for the last at least 20 years. Because I remember I was a kid, and after the 1970 World Cup, my father took me to the stadium following year, and I was able to see not only Pelé playing, but 6 or 7 players from the winning team in Mexico. Now, this is impossible in Brazil. For the last 20 years, Brazilian players are just players that you see on TV. Not only the best Brazilian players, but the good Brazilian players are playing abroad, and the medium-range Brazilian players are also playing abroad. So basically, although it's still a spectator sport, and every kid plays it, the best players are not seen. As a diplomat, I have been lucky enough to be able to see Brazilian players when I was stationed in Lisbon, in Europe, and it's something of a perk, really, because being able to go to the stadium and see the best Brazilian players it's not an experience that's available for the average Brazilian fan, and has not been for the last 20 or 30 years. But it still remains a spectator sport, and for everybody. And in terms of playing, you mentioned Kaká, which was a very good player, and there are a few others, middle-class Brazilians who have talent and decide to give it a try on professional football. It's not very common. We had also Caio, we had Socrates from the 1982 team, who was a doctor, which is something that I can think of only another player who did not reach the Brazilian team, Alcinho. But I think it's still a sport where the ones who reach the pinnacle, let's say, and get rich and get sold to play abroad are still poor Brazilians. Once in a while, you identify someone who is middle class, but I don't think it's very common. And to finish, I'd like to tell you that we are like more or less brothers, because you were a fan of Grêmio, which is a tricolor team, with 3 colors in the shirt, and also Fluminense. And Fluminense has, let's say, an advantage, not in terms of football, but in terms of its fans, because you know that we can count Chico Buarque and Gilberto Gil among the fans of Fluminense, very important Brazilian musicians. And also, football inspired a few Brazilian writers, very good. And the one that I like the most is Nelson Rodrigues, who also wrote Chronicles and for the theater, and he was a fanatic Fluminense fan. So I'm still expecting Fluminense to be the champion this year of the Brazilian football championship. But if it does not happen, the most important thing for us, and I think this is important to understand Brazilian football, is that the rivalries are still local, because Brazil is such a big country, and we had football for 6 or 7 years before we could organize the first Brazilian championship due to the distances. So basically, all the rivalries that were bred and grew were local, and for me, it's more important to beat Flamengo than being Brazilian champion. So thank you again for your speech.
Yeah, thank you very much for your wonderful contribution. I think we all could see here, this is a Brazilian talking about football and how passionate he speaks, especially about his team, Fluminense. And I agree, yeah, so we are kind of brothers. As long as Grêmio is not playing against Fluminense, then we have a problem, okay? I obviously, yes, I agree with what you said. Perhaps I should have put it a bit more in perspective. Obviously, football still is very popular, right? And it is sports from the masses. But what I wanted to say is that also it is becoming a little bit more a sport of the elites recently for different reasons, because of expensive tickets, also because spaces in urban areas are getting restricted, okay, because of construction. So there's not much space to play football like in open fields and so. But obviously, football still is very popular in Brazil, no doubt about that. And also, what I didn't say is like rich footballers are less than 1% of the players. Okay, most of the players earn little money by playing football. 99% of them earn perhaps $200 or so a month playing football professionally in Brazil. So the vast majority is not rich. Okay, we just know the famous ones, right? Of course, and because they play for the national team. Yes, anyone else would like to say something or comment? Thank you very much for your contribution, Carlos. Okay, no more comments. Okay, so that's it then for today. Next week, as I already announced before, Brazil is commemorating 200 years of independence on the 7th of September. And the 7th of September is Wednesday. So we'll have a special session on Wednesday and not Thursday. So in 6 days, we will have another session. So next week will be the exception. We'll have a session, a live session on the 7th of September. I will announce it in the WhatsApp group, okay? So that's it from us here today. I say ciao, bye-bye, and see you again next week. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye, ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.
Tchau, boa noite.
Tchau, tchau.
Bye.
Bye.